give that a 7. Wow, so many people still coming in. You know, Gene Frost, anybody know Gene Frost? He's passed away. He lived to be like 138. He was very old when I was a kid, and he said, if you get to church at 9 o'clock or whenever it starts, like, it was a big deal, you're late. And I shouldn't say anything. I'm not trying to talk about it in this context. But just remember, you need to try to come to church early so that you can edify one another. Like, make sure you can talk to everybody. Here, we still got a whole nother crowd coming in. Come on in. All right, well, here we go. We're going to be in Habakkuk. We finished up chapter 1 of Habakkuk, and I don't really remember where we ended up. We talked about the dragnet. We talked about the things that they caught in their dragnet, and we'll just go on to chapter 2, okay? So Habakkuk here is picturing himself as a watchman, kind of standing on the city wall, kind of waiting for news, okay? And this is the idea that this would have been something that was very common in the ancient world. There were watchmen that would stand on the wall, and they would look out like this in the movies and look for people coming, and they would, you've seen that like in TV shows and stuff like that. So he says, I will stand my watch and set myself on the rampart and watch to see what he will say to me and what I will answer when I am reproved. And I think that's one of the neatest verses to start off chapter 2 with, because he's talking about standing with his watch, and then he set himself on the rampart. When they say rampart in the Bible, what does that mean? What? A what? Right, so a rampart would have been anything that would have been a fortification of some type. It would have been maybe the city wall. And again, whenever he talks about his watch, this is poetic language, y'all. He's talking about, when he says the word watch, he's saying the same thing as a rampart. It's the idea that everybody would have known he's saying the same thing 2 different ways. He's talking about watching, and then he's going to watch to see what he, and who's he? God is going to say to him. And what's really great, he says, what will I answer when I'm reproved? And then and he's basically saying, when I'm corrected, what am I going to say? And then I thought to myself, I wrote myself a note. Habakkuk realizes here, God may rebuke him or challenge him, and he wants to remain humble and teachable. And I thought, what a great example that is. This man, Habakkuk, has spent most of the first chapter asking a lot of questions about God and what God was doing. And here's a wonderful example where you can just know that faith doesn't mean that you can never ask questions, right? I mean, who here has got faith, but they still have questions? I don't know. Or maybe you have faith, but you have doubts about some things. Does that mean that you don't have faith? I think there's varying degrees of faith. The Bible talks about those of little faith and those of great faith and that kind of thing, yet they have faith. But I just think it's neat that Habakkuk says this thing, what will I answer him when I'm reproved? How many times do we like to be reproved? How many of us we even have the attitude when you're, like, if I'm getting ready to ask Corey something, I'm like, I'm going to wait for Corey to tell me straight when I'm wrong. I'm going to ask him a question, and then when he tells me I'm wrong, how am I going to answer that? Am I having a good attitude? Right? Wouldn't I? If I'm assuming that let's say you're the authority on whatever this is, I'm waiting for Corey to tell me the way I need to think, and how am I going to answer that? That's what he was saying. God is right. I'm wrong. What's my attitude going to be like when I answer him? And that's a wonderful New Testament, modern day example on how to act when it comes to the questions that you might have about your Creator, about the things that are going on in your life. How are you going to answer God? How are you going to answer a situation? Yes, ma'am. You got to talk really loud. A question? Well, I think the Bible tells us it was a vision. So, but I don't know the answer to that. But whatever it was, Habakkuk was picking up on it. It could have been a spiritual application. I wrote some notes about that in the first chapter, but I don't remember what it was. He said evidently it was something he saw. So he saw it. I don't know what that looked like, but it's still a pretty neat thing. Does that help? Yes, sir. Yes. Yeah. Yes. There's lots of correlations between Habakkuk and Isaiah. That's true. Yeah, that's a good point. I'm glad we're not teaching Isaiah. God, I don't know if I can call on you this week. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's good. I think you're perfectly correct. Like we should be able to ask questions. I think the response is where the responsibility comes on our behalf. We have to be willing to accept the response, and the response is not sometimes what we want to hear, or maybe you don't hear anything, But it's everything happens in God's time. But let's go on to verse 2 because he says, "Then the Lord answered me and said, 'Write the vision and make it plain on tablets, that it may run." That he may run who reads it. And again, this is a really neat thing. When he said write it on tablets, what do you think that meant? I don't expect y'all to know the answers, but anything that was wrote on a tablet was meant to be permanent. It was the idea that it would be something that everybody could read, everybody would see it, and those that would run to tell it could show it. It just shows permanency. It'd be something easy to understand. It'd be something that they could carry with them in a sense. And then he says the idea of running, and there's an urgency. It's the idea of getting people to respond to it. It's just kind of a neat thing about writing this vision. Look at verse 3. He says, "For the vision is yet for the appointed time, but at the end it will speak, and it will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry." Well, wow, this is interesting. They're talking about an appointed time. Anything that's an appointed time is something that happens on God's time. And that is so much of this world. Habakkuk wanted answers now. He wanted immediate justice. But God said that it was going to happen on a set time. He was answering Habakkuk's questions. He was like, look, it's not going to be a lie. What God says is going to be trustworthy. It's going to be something, even though it may be delayed, which is what this was. It was delayed justice in a sense. But it was going to happen. And the idea of tarries, he says, wait for it. I think so many times the problem that we have is that we don't want to wait for anything. I'm the worst. I don't want to wait for nothing. I really don't. I mean, it's a character flaw. But here's the point. God's justice may seem slow, but we're told to wait. We're told to endure. We're told to trust. And these are the things. These are the characteristics God wants us to have. And I wrote myself a point here. It's always the delay that gets us. The promise and the fulfillment. That's what we want. We want the promise, and then we want the fulfillment. And here's the example in this book here, is that Habakkuk is being told by God, wait, 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 wait. It's going to be. It's not going to be now. It's going to be the time I say. Again, another perfect modern example for us. Wait. Wait on the Lord. Learn to be patient. Learn to be long-suffering. Learn to be steadfast. Learn to endure. Go through the trials. Go through the problems. That's what God wants you to do. And remember, these types of trials, these things are what the Bible talks about that produce character and hope and perseverance in our character. And it's a good thing for us. It's a good thing for us to learn to wait. Look at verse 4. "Behold the proud. His soul is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith." And this is probably one of the better verses in the book of Habakkuk. He's referring back to Babylon. Babylon was a proud person. They trust themselves. They exalt themselves. They depended on their power. They resisted God. They're not upright. They're spiritually corrupted. This is the description of Babylon. And here's the contrast. The just, what do the just do? They live by his faith. Which is the opposite. That's the contrast of Babylon. That's what God was telling Habakkuk. That's the whole point. The idea of live by faith, the idea of a righteous person. This person survives. This person endures. This person remains. And I wrote myself a question. Habakkuk seemed to ask I wrote this 2 weeks ago. Habakkuk seemed to ask, how do faithful live when evil seems to win? And the answer is, by what? Faith. By faith. By faith. That's exactly right. If you can't learn that lesson, that's a great lesson. That's why. That's how you do it. If you want to know how you endure that, it's by faith. And what's faith? What's the definition of faith? I always say that's a description of faith. What I think faith means is trust or confidence in something. Remember, trust or confidence in God. That is the most important thing that you can have in your life, is trust and confidence in God. Look at verse 5. We're going to do 2 chapters tonight. Indeed, which means, what's indeed mean, Rhonda? What? No, you had it last week. What's indeed mean? What's the meaning? No, it means truly. Okay, truly. Because he transgresses by wine, he is a proud man, and he does not stay at home, because he enlarges his desires as hell. This language is so interesting. And he is like death and cannot be satisfied. He gathers to himself all nations. This is talking about Babylon, okay? And he heaps up for himself all peoples. All peoples. And it's like, here's the point. Babylon, they keep on taking more, and they keep on taking more. They're never full. They live by their own appetite. And I love that expression. If my appetite would include 3 Dairy Queen milkshakes every day of my life, which it could, should I do that? No, I'm just saying, I can imagine me being any bigger. But let's just say that I did that. The point would be, if I just live by my appetite, what does it get me? But is it okay just to live by your appetite? No. You can't just live by your appetite. I could do that, but should I do it? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Don't do that. It's like not being satisfied more and more. The spiritual lesson is this. It's greed and pride. It creates an endless hunger. When you have greed and you have pride, all you want to do is consume more. And that's what the Babylonians did. And without God, basically, human ambition just becomes consuming and destructive. That's 100% true. He heaps for himself. Look, there's a phrase he said there. I've got a different Bible this week. I have my dad's old Bible. I don't know where I found it. But it talks about heaping up for himself. It's the idea of, I always think about Nebuchadnezzar and what he did. That was what he did. Look at verse 6. Look at verse 6. He says, Shall not all these take up a proverb against him, and a taunting riddle against him, and say, Woe to him who increases, what is not his? How long? And to him who loads himself with many pledges. This is really interesting language. Again, it's poetic. He's saying the same thing over and over again. It's like, here's what he says. All these things, these are just all these. When he says all these, he's talking about all the nations that Babylon conquered. All the things that Babylon did. They took these nations. The proverb. What's a proverb in the Bible? What's the word proverb mean? So it's a wise saying. That's what I think it means. Okay. And then he says a proverb against him. Then he says a taunting riddle. So again, not saying it's the same thing, but it's the idea. Here's the point. Here's what he's saying. All these nations are going to basically, they're the ones that are going to mock. They're the ones that are going to come up with a riddle. They're the ones that are going to come up with a wise saying about Babylon because of what they did. They took over all these nations, and now God's going to come in and he's going to deliver Babylon to all these nations. And all these nations are going to start saying things about Babylon. That's just what it means there. Like he says the word woe, looking up many pledges. What was a pledge in the Bible in the old days? I always think about the book of Amos, and if I remember the story right, the priests there, they would take coats as a pledge, almost like a loan. Like you could get money for the coats or something for God. I don't know the whole story. I didn't go back and study that. But I remember the story. And then they would lay those coats out, and the priests would have prostitutes on the coats, and they would have fornication on the coats. And it was like, When you think about a pledge, what do y'all think? What's it talking about? If you had a pledge back then, what did that mean? Huh? Yeah, it's like a debt. It's like where you get something for something. It's like a cosigner, or it's like a loan in a sense. And this is how he uses it. It's like a load of debt or like a load of guilt. The Babylonians had taken up so many bad things to so many other nations, they heap up for themselves all these pledges that were against them, all these things that they owed back the other nations. And that's what Habakkuk was saying. It was the idea that they were obligated because of all the conquests and all the extortion that they did to the surrounding nations. And Habakkuk brings it up. They're going to have this problem. They're weighed down by stolen treasure. And it's going to be hard on them because the judgment's coming. Look at verse 7. And then he kind of talks more about that. He goes, will not your creditors rise up suddenly? Will they not awaken who oppress you? And you will become their booty? So here's the point. When creditors rise up, what's that mean? The loans due. They want their money. And then the ones that awaken, the ones that you oppress, what are they going to do to you? They're going to start oppressing you. You're going to become their plunder. You're going to become their spoil. That's what he's saying. It's just like the imagery shifts to debt now. Babylon's been taking and taking. It's a moral debt they've accumulated. The bill was coming due. And that's the lesson. That's Habakkuk was talking to him. And it's going to be a rise up suddenly. It's going to be a sudden collapse. And they're going to be awakened. The people are going to rise up against Babylon. And now Babylon's going to be plundered. That's what the story was. That's what he means by that. Look at verse 8. Because you have plundered many nations, all the remnant. What's a remnant mean? Okay. There's a word I'm looking for. You're supposed to read my mind. I done forgot the what? Remaining, that's a good one. Or survivors is another word. So here's the point. You have plundered many nations. All the remnant of the people shall plunder you because of men's blood and the violence of the land and the city and all who dwell in it. Again, it's the idea of God clearly spells out the why. Here's the reason. It's the violence, it's the bloodshed, it's the conquest, it's the cruelty to the people of the city. And it's just like the New Testament lesson. I wrote down 2 verses, Galatians 6 and verse 7. Whatever a man sows, that he will also. Yep, that's exactly what's being talked about here. Matthew 26:52. Those that live by the violence will often what? Peter and his sword. What did it say? He'll die by the sword. That's exactly what was going on. Look at verse 9. This is the second woe. Woe to him who covets evil gain for his house, that he may be set his nest on high, that he may be delivered from the power of disaster. Woe to him who covets evil gain for his house. And now the idea shifts to greed. It shifts to unjust wealth or pride. And if you covet something, what do you want? Huh? What's the idea of covet? Right. I wrote down, it's a greedily desire. And now usually it's used in a negative sense. Like sometimes we pray like, I covet your prayers. That means good. I get that. But the Bible uses almost negatively every single time. Like pride is always used in a negative fashion. But that's another story. But it's not a normal ambition. It's a unnormal type of trying to gain from somebody else, and it's evil gains. What's in the Bible, what's evil gains? If it's an evil gain, how did you get it? Through dishonest means. It's not good. And then he says, set his nest on high. When you think about a nest up high, why do birds build up a nest up on high? What? Safety. Yeah. I'm trying to think. You don't see too many eagles' nests around here. But that's kind of have you ever heard of the eagle's nest? When I say eagle's nest in World War II, what do I mean? Somebody know what that was? I knew Scott would know, yeah. You're not supposed to, yeah. So Hitler had a place up in the mountains. I think it was in it's right on the Austrian-German border. And you know what he called it? The eagle's nest. It's still there today. And it was up there. Why did he do that? Because he thought he would be out of the way. And that's the point. That's what they thought too. The Babylon thought their wall. What did Babylon thought? They thought their walls were tall. They thought their military was tough. They thought their armies were unbeatable. They thought they had wealth to protect them and that no one can reach us. And what happened? Did they get reached? Yep, they got delivered. And I wrote myself a question. Can you build a fortress high enough to escape God? I mean, was it Assyria had those walls that were 60 feet tall and 60 feet wide? Babylon had a wall. The top of Babylon's wall, they said you could ride 3 chariots in a row around the top of it. Could you imagine having 3 chariots? That's how thick the wall was. And they would ride it, The Medes and the Persians, yeah. Yeah. On Babylon, yeah, something like that. Yeah. Yeah, okay, look at verse 10. You gave shameful counsel to your house, cutting off many peoples, and sinned against your soul. You gave shameful counsel to you. You know what's funny? When you think about giving shameful counsel, it's the idea that Babylon was making plans to secure its future, in a sense, thinking it was wise, but they thought that conquering nations and destroying people and taking what didn't belong to you was a wise and safe plan. That's shameful counsel. That's what that means. Just taking more plunder. That was the wise thing they thought to do. But here's the point. What they thought was wise, what did God say it was? Shameful. So when you spend your life trying to figure out how you can get more, maybe at the expense of somebody else, or maybe the idea that you're coveting more from somebody, and then you think that you're saving up for your future, and you think that's a good thing, what's God call it? You're a fool. You're a fool. That's what God was saying. You sinned against your soul. Instead of protecting themselves, they destroyed themselves. Instead of protecting yourself that you think you're doing, you're literally destroying yourself. It's interesting. You sinned against your soul. And how often do we do this? I wrote myself a question. Eric, how often do you do this? Do I ever lie to protect myself? I have. Do I ever cheat to make more money? I don't know if I've done that. I've cheated. Like I cheated in school when I was growing up for sure. I got caught. Mother had to go to school and she defended me. I'm like, Mom, I really did it. She's like, don't worry about it. Do I oppress others to get more power? I don't think I've done that either. But here's the thing. I've done a lot of bad things. I'll tell you that. But here's the point. That's what they did. How often do you do the things that you shouldn't do because you think you're protecting yourself? I don't know. It's kind of a joke. You shouldn't protect yourself. You should let yourself be defrauded. There's a biblical principle of letting yourself be defrauded. It's in the 1 Corinthians. And that is the way you should live. Let yourself be taken advantage of. Humble yourself. Let other people take advantage of you. Then God will set you up. You try to take advantage of other people, God will set you down. Why? He is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep only to obtain what he cannot lose. Why don't we think right? Why do I worry about this world and everything I can get, and I do, when I can't keep any of it? Why would I just give it up, that I might obtain something that can never be taken away from me, which is heaven? Why do we think so wrong? Babylon was caught up in all this stupid thinking. And guess what? We can do the same thing. Do the same thing. Look at verse 11. For the stone will cry out from the wall, and the beam from the timbers will answer it. Even their buildings that they stole the money from the other nations to make this wonderful palace, even the timbers and the stone cry out against their own evil. You know, they bear witness against those that built them. And here's the point. The truth cannot be suppressed forever. Even the walls are going to tell the truth. You know, you think you're going to lie and you're going to get away with something, and don't you know that your lie is going to be found out? It's going to be found out. Your lie will be found out, 100%. Look at verse 12. Another woe. Woe to him who builds a town with bloodshed, who establishes a city by iniquity. Pretty simple. The cities, the palaces, the monuments, they look magnificent, but God saw all the suffering behind them. Is it great to have a city that's beautiful, but yet all the way that you got it was just because of suffering other people? Look at verse 13. Verse 13 says, behold. What's behold mean? What? Look. You got to say it right, Corey. Do it for me. That's what it meant. When they said behold, they didn't go, look. They went, look, behold. That's the way you would have read this. Behold the proud. Oh, no. I got the wrong behold there. I was in verse 4. Verse 13, behold, is it not the Lord of hosts? When they say the Lord of hosts, what's that mean? That means, when the Bible says Lord of hosts, that means the Lord of all the armies of the earth, all the spiritual armies, all the angelic armies, everything that is of any authority. God is the Lord of all those things. It's meant to be awe-inspiring. It's lost on us because we don't understand that. But but to the reader here, they would have understood it. That the people's labor to feed the fire, and the nations weary themselves in vain. What does vain mean in the Bible? Well, what's the word? It starts with an E. Empty. Here's what he's saying. Look, behold, the people's labor. What were the people building? What were the people of Babylon building? They were building all these wonderful things, these cities and structures and stone. And what was it going to be fed to? The fires. It was going to be burned up. Going to be burned up. And the nations weary themselves. You would just weary. Let's see, let me see if I had a note on something like that. I don't know. This is like the idea that, okay, all the work, all the pride, all the oppression, it all goes to the fire. You understand that? Everything that you work for here too, in a sense, it all goes to the fire. So the Bible says, knowing that the earth and the works that are in it shall be burned up, what manner of persons ought you to be? If we would just trust the things that we don't see and not put our trust in the things we can see, but in the things we don't see. And the Bible tells us to do that too. Yeah. And here's the point. God wasn't condemning the hard work. I think God loves that. I think it's good to be a hard worker. And this hard work they're talking about in verse 14. It's the idea behind the work. Look at verse 14. That was 13, I'm sorry. 14. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the water covers the sea. Here's another wonderful poetic verse in the Bible. He says, look, the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Can anybody explain that? If you take the sea, what covers the sea? It's not a trick question. The Bible tells us. The waters. So if all the seas are covered by water, how much of the sea is not covered? It's all covered by water. It means that every single thing is going to be all-encompassing. There's not going to be a gap anywhere in it. It's the idea of everything is going to be covered. And I wrote myself a note. Again, otherwise, Eric, don't judge history by what you see here. Babylon's glory will fade, but God's glory is going to fill the whole earth. Just like, that's the lesson for us. This country, its glory will fade one day, but God's glory is always going to be. Look at verse 15. Woe to him, another woe. Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbor, pressing him to your bottle, even to make him drunk, that you may look on his nakedness. Again, this is really interesting. This is the idea of somebody deliberately getting another person drunk in order to shame them, exploit them, humiliate them, take advantage of them. And that's exactly what God is telling Habakkuk that Babylon did. When you think about looking upon somebody's nakedness in the Bible, what story do you think about? Noah. Noah got off. Did you say that? He's showing off. Noah got off the ark. He built a vineyard. He got drunk. And what did his son see? Remember, they knew he was in there drunk and he was naked. And who looked at his father? Ham did. What did Shem and Japheth do so that they wouldn't look at the nakedness of their father? They put a sheet on their shoulders and they walked backwards, not to look at the nakedness of the father, because that was the most shameful thing that you could do to your father, was to look upon his nakedness. And that's exactly what the Babylonians were doing here. They made people drunk that they might take their clothes off, that they might expose them and humiliate them and make them feel like, to the ancient person that read this made perfect sense. Look at verse 16. He said, you are filled with shame instead of glory. You also drink and be exposed and uncircumcised. The cup of the Lord's right hand will be turned against you, and utter shame will be on your glory. And here's the point. Now Hezekiah is saying, or Habakkuk is saying, I don't know why I get that mixed up. Habakkuk is saying, look, everything that you did, guess what? Now it's on you. Now it's on you. He said, you be filled with shame instead of glory. You drink. You drink. You get drunk. You get drunk. Okay? You press him to the bottle. Make him drunk. Be exposed as uncircumcised. And then it says the cup of the Lord's right hand. And when you think about the cup of the Lord's right hand, you know what that means? It's the idea the right hand would have been like the strong hand. It's like God's fury. It's God's anger. It's the military might of God. It's God's strength. That's what he's saying there. He said, the cup of the Lord's right hand would be turned against you, and utter shame will be on your glory. You're not going to be Babylon's not going to be remembered for their glory. They're going to be remembered for their fall, and it's going to be utter shame. Utter shame. God's power. And this is a symbolic idea of the cup of the right hand. Look at verse 17. For the violence done to Lebanon will cover you, and the plunder of beasts which made them afraid. Right when I read the word beast, I got excited. Okay, it said, and the plunder of beasts which made them afraid because of men's blood and the violence of the land and the city and all who dwell in it. Now, this is really interesting. When you think about the violence of Lebanon, again, we've talked about this before. What would have been a big deal about Lebanon back then? The cedar trees, right? Everybody wanted their trees. Why? Because I guess they could build with them. But So here's the point. God was upset at Babylon because they took the trees of Lebanon and they cut them down and they destroyed them. They took the beasts of the earth and they destroyed them and used them. It's true. That's what it means there. It's like the idea, not only that, for men's blood, they murdered, they oppressed. God sees all the violence. He saw all the exploitation. He saw the trees cut. He saw the animals killed. He saw the people killed. And guess what? He didn't like it. That's what that means. Verse 18, what profit is the image then that its maker should carve it, the molded image, a teacher of lies? How is a molded image a teacher of lies? It's really easy. Can I cut a tree down? The Bible talks about cutting a tree down, carving an idol, and then what do you do with the rest of the wood in the Bible? You make a fire to warm yourself. But then you bow to the image that you created. What is that image teaching you? A bunch of lies. A bunch of lies. What profit is it that you should carve it? That the maker of its mold should trust in it to make mute idols? And then this is really interesting. Look at verse 19. Woe to him who says to the wood, awake, to the silent stone, arise, it shall teach. Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, and in it there is no breath at all. But look at verse 20. This is what's neat about it. He goes, but the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. Look at the contrast. All along they're thinking that this idol is going to say something or do something. It's really kind of what. And then I wrote this. I wrote myself a note there. I was going to read it. Okay. Here he goes. Idol cannot speak because they're dead. The nation should be silent because God is alive. That's the contrast. The idols are dead. There's no profit in it. But yet you go before the God of the creation of the universe and you keep silent. Why? Because he's holy. He's alive. He's done all these things. This is the point of that chapter. Look at chapter 3. Now this is where Habakkuk kind of stops. He kind of switches gears a little bit, and now he kind of goes from questioning God's prayer, and now he talks about instead of questioning God, he's kind of praying and worshiping God. And this is really beautiful language. It's not hard to read if you just read it, but it's like a prayer, and it's in the Bible. We should read it. We should study it. Okay. He says a prayer of Habakkuk the prophet, and then he uses that word there, which means they don't really know exactly what it means, but it's the idea of pouring out your heart and worship to God. It's a style of music, they say. So this would have been a psalm or something he would have sang. Okay. He says, "O Lord, I have heard your speech, and I was afraid, or I was afraid. O Lord, revive your work in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years, make it known. In wrath, remember mercy." Now here he is. He's begging for help. Habakkuk's like, look, I've heard your speech. I'm scared of it. Everything you said, it frightens me. I don't want to go in through that, but I know it's coming. I know all this is going to happen to us. I'm scared about it. Would you revive your work in the midst of what is going on? That's what he meant by in that year. He's like, look, will you not forget us? Will you revive us again? Will you make it so that we can come back? Habakkuk was asking God for help. I know this is going to happen. Will you help me? Help me to have faith through it. Help me to live through it. In your wrath, will you remember to be merciful? It's not enough to say, I don't want your wrath. He's saying, look, I know your wrath is coming. Will you be merciful to me? Wouldn't it be a good idea to ask for mercy in that instance? 100%. God came from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran. His glory was covered the heavens, and the earth was full of his praise. In this verse here, these two things are just another a little bit more poetic language here. Teman and Paran were the regions of South Israel, and they're basically associated in the times of Moses, whenever God kind of manifested himself in certain ways. And again, the reader would have understood this. It's just talking about God's presence, God's majesty, the idea of creation responding to God's greatness, and that's what it kind of means there. The earth was full of his praise. That's what that means. Even creation understands God and who he is. Look at verse 4. His brightness was like the light. He had rays flashing from his hand, and there was power, and there his power was hidden. And you think about that, it's like more visions of God's power and majesty. The idea of light here would have been like purity, holiness, and glory. And then it says the word rays. But if you read the King James Version, it says the word horn. What does the word horn mean in the Bible? If you think about Revelation, it was the idea of power. It was the idea of, power. And here's the point. And then he says this word, power was hidden. The idea that even when he doesn't reveal all his greatness, but what still has to be revealed is still amazing. That's what's kind of neat about that verse. He says that. He says, and there his power was hidden. Even the things that God does not show us, it is powerful. Not just the things you can see, but the things you can't see are powerful. Look at verse 5. And it says, before him went pestilence, and fever followed at his feet. And that's just the idea of fire and disease. And this is what accompanies God's arrival in terms of judgment. You ever heard that Bob Seger song, You'll Accompany Me? I love that song. And he's talking about what? There's this woman he loves, and she's going to accompany him wherever he goes. It's a good song. But here's the point. What accompanies God when he comes to do judgment? It's pestilence and it's fire. Habakkuk was saying, look, I know this is coming. I know this is coming. It's pestilence and fire. It follows at his feet. Look at verse 6. He stood and measured the earth. He looked and startled the nations, and the everlasting mountains were scattered. The perpetual hills bowed. His ways are everlasting. Again, it's more of the same thing, emphasizing God's absolute authority over the earth. Even the oldest features of creation would have been the hills and the mountains. Everybody calls the mountains old or the old man and this kind of thing. That was back then too as well. If you can measure something in the Bible, y'all, you know what that meant? If you can measure something in the Bible, that meant you had authority over it. And that's what it's saying here. God said, look, he can measure everything. It's all under his authority. That's what it's saying there. The world was, appeared stable, but it's not stable. Even the earth is temporary, and God is not. Okay, well, that's all the time we got. So we'll start in verse 7. Then we're going to be doing, God willing, Zephaniah. And I'm sure that's going to be rip-roaring exciting too. So y'all just wait with bated breath on that one. Thank you for your time.